Welcome to LGBTQ 101. My name is Kayla and I use they, them pronouns as is seen on the PowerPoint with you guys right now. So this is the agenda for today. We're going to do an introduction, terminology, and then normally we would do questions at the very end. So if we get right into it. So the general basis for the LGBTQ community, there's a lot of letters, there's a lot of acronyms. It's constantly changing, and but this is the basics. So L being lesbian, G being gay, B being bisexual, T being transgender, and the Q being either queer or questioning. So the full acronym that a lot of people use is actually LGBTQIA+. There's another set of acronyms that's going around, I believe, under LGBTQIAQ+, but just knowing the basics is super important when working with the community. Okay. And then a quick piece about the actual order of the letters, because there has been some changes, some large changes over the years to the acronym. The acronym for the community has evolved dramatically. What was once just gay moved to encompass a vast variety of identities that could not always be held under one word. There's a historical significance to changing from the LGBT community to the LGBTQIA+ community, which is mostly tied back to the American AIDS crisis of the late 80s and early 90s. Lesbians took it upon themselves to care for the gay men that were dying of AIDS and HIV, that many people refused to help, be it in medical care or just in everyday life. They were the last comfort that many gay men felt before their passing, and this sacrifice and willingness to show compassion in the face of discrimination is one reason that the L comes first in the acronyms nowadays. It is typically seen as a more outdated acronym to use the G before the L, especially for younger LGBTQ people. It's going to be a bit jarring to use anything but LGBTQ. Another thing that I think is really important when it comes to working with and learning about the LGBTQ community is figures of LGBTQ liberation in America. So these are just a few of the faces of people that were directly involved in the Stonewall riots of 1969 and further activism work within the community until either the times of their death or even still today. So that's Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, and Stormy Delavery. Both Sylvia and Marsha are seen as major players in, again, the Stonewall riots. Marsha is actually quoted in multiple literatures as being the one to throw the first stone of the Stonewall riot, but all of them were reported to be there that night. Both Sylvia and Marsha then went on to form STAR, which was Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries, nice mouthful there, that helped trans youth in New York City find housing and other accommodations. Stormy to this day still lives in New York, and at her time was known as kind of a protector of everyone that was gay in New York City. Further learning is at the very end. This is just Glisson's history cards with extended biographies that I linked at the bottom. Yeah. So then to go more into the terminology. So the L is lesbian, a woman who's emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Women and non-binary people may use this term to describe themselves. The term lesbian, fun history fact, comes from the Greek island of Lesbos, home of the famed Sappho, a poet that is credited as one of the first lesbians. So gay, a person who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to members of the same sex. It's predominantly used by men who are attracted to other men, but again, this is an umbrella term in the community, and a lot of young people are reclaiming this word as that umbrella term and will just describe themselves as such pretty often. Then we have bisexual. This is a person emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to more than one sex, gender, or gender identity. The main thing to point out on this slide would be the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality. They're under the same umbrella category, but the easiest way to distinguish the two is that bisexual people are attracted to multiple genders, and pansexual people are attracted to all genders. This would be a good point at which to discuss the fact that because there are so many different identities, understanding all of them is nearly impossible, but understanding the basics are really important, because you might have a client or a friend or someone in your life come forward with this, and remembering that though they are similar terms, they are not the same is important with interactions with them. And then transgender, persons whose gender identity or expression does not match the one they were assigned at birth. This includes transgender females, transgender males, non-binary people, agender people, and more. Again, umbrella terms with a lot of smaller categories within it. In general, most people will use the term transgender. There's also the term gender diverse that's very popular in a lot of literature right now, which is the same type of umbrella term. That's where you're going to get people. Gender diverse people are like non-binary people or agender people. The next set of terms is queer and questioning. So queer is a term people often use to express a spectrum of identities and orientations that are counter to the mainstream. Queer is often used as a catch-all to include many people, including those who do not identify as exclusively straight and or folks who are non-binary or have gender-expansive identities. It was obviously previously used as a slur, but it has been slowly starting to be reclaimed by many parts of the LGBTQ community. Questioning is a term used to describe people who are in the process of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity. I think it's really great that we have something for both someone who doesn't necessarily want the label and for people that are just coming into exploring that part of themselves. For a lot of people, it's a lifelong process of kind of discovering who you are and who you want to be, and leaving room for that type of expression is really important in communities where it's very common to not want to be just one thing for the rest of your life. And then let's talk gender versus sex, everyone's favorite discussion. Gender is the outermost presentation of one's gender identity, and it's how a person presents themselves to the world. Sex is biological. It's a category assigned at birth, typically to describe the genitals and the associated sex, male and female. Biological sex is a combination of primary and secondary sex characteristics that are assigned to the male and female body. Primary traits include a vagina, penis, ovaries, and testes, while secondary traits include pubic hair, your hips widening, developing breasts, voice deepening, and starting a menstrual cycle. At this point, I also think it's important to bring up the I of LGBTQIA, which is commonly known as intersex people. So these are people who do not have the typical sex characteristics that are typically congruent with the biological sex, male or female. There's a lot more understanding of this now more than ever, but human beings are malleable creatures. We are not born perfect, and that means that we cannot perfectly fit into these two categories without even mentioning or being a part of the gender expansive part of the community. You can be born intersex and have any combination of biological sex characteristics that don't necessarily mean you consider yourself even transgender. But by making our dichotomy either male or female, we tend to ignore this group of people that are far more common than people think, and There are a lot of legislative and policy issues with this group of people. Corrective surgery at birth is very common still. There were attempts in Connecticut in the 2019 and 2020 legislative agenda to ban corrective surgery for intersex individuals at birth. By corrective, I mean things that were not medically necessary. There are some intersex babies that are born with issues with their urinary tract. That obviously needs to be fixed medically. But things like completely removing a set of testes to correct them into being more biologically female is not a necessary medical procedure. The reason that they're often included in the LGBTQ community is because of their similar struggles with the rest of the community. And that's why they're important to be mentioned in a presentation like this. Okay. And then gender identity versus gender expression. So gender identity, again, it's the innermost understanding of one's gender. It's typically intrinsic. It's your understanding of being male or female, non-binary, etc. Children usually have this understanding by the time they're in preschool, and it only is explored more as they become a little bit older. That's why you see a lot more younger transgender youth nowadays, because we're starting to actually open up the spaces for people to explore that part of themselves sooner rather than later. Gender expression is the ways in which we perform gender, wearing dresses, having painted nails. There are certain kind of characteristics that are typically assigned to either being a man or female, being polite or hot-headed, but this is the way that we do gender. It's a performance that we do without even realizing it, and it's typically based in our socialization in our youth. But again, it's not a concrete thing. Anyone can wear a dress. It doesn't mean that they're automatically a woman. Now to pronouns. So this is just a few examples of pronouns that people might have. You have sort of the very classic ones, such as she, her, he, him. There's they, them. There's also a lot of people nowadays that go by she, they, he, she, he, she, they, or they just say that they use all pronouns. It's an ever-evolving kind of social continuum that we find ourselves on when it comes to pronouns, and just realizing that the possibilities are endless with that, and not being so closed off to the possibility of pronouns makes it so it's a lot less jarring when people come to you with them. If you only think that someone can be a she or a him, someone comes to you with a they, and it freaks you out for a second. But getting used to the fact that there are other pronouns and other forms of expression means that you'll have less of a reaction every time. Okay. Then the importance of pronouns. So they're typically very important to people, and they should be respected at all times. This includes when the person is not present. I underlined all of this for a reason. There's a tendency to respect people's pronouns when they're in front of you, and then to disregard them when they're not in earshot. By doing this, you're making it very easy to mess up. That is the one piece of advice that I will go with this. If you call someone who wants to be using they, them pronouns, he in private, you're more likely to mess up with that person. If this is a client, that is going to be an issue for them if they want to use they, them pronouns, and because you haven't been using them, you accidentally slip out a he far more often than just is with you learning their pronouns. There are also other ways to support those that use pronouns that may not match their assumed gender or the assumed gender that you believe them to be. Ask and provide your own. Include pronouns in introduction conversations, especially in groups. Include them in your email signature and even on business cards, and be more open to gender presentation in your perception of that person and their pronouns By that, I mean that not everyone is transitioned, not everyone wants to transition into one or the other, like either a male or female presentation. Not everyone wants to look like what you believe a woman or man looks like. So if someone comes with pronouns and it doesn't seem like that's the ones they're supposed to be using, just look into all of the different expressions of gender that now happen now at this point in time, and it'll be much easier for everyone involved.